Nova and Vault. They are some of the best Warframes in the game, both of them actually getting an S tier placement in my 2025 Warframe tier list, and that should be quite apparent from two of my recent videos focusing on them. Within these, I cover both the Vault and Okina Prime Incarnate setup that has you running around with a perma red crit, crazy melee influence build on Okina that gets somewhere around 200 kpm, and on Nova's side, two builds that range from an insanely min-max null star nuke build to taking advantage of how Molecular Prime interacts with Gen 1 Incarnate weapons to also create a cascading AoE nuke. So why are we looking at these two frames again? Well, very recently, I sourced two more builds concerning them that I just could not pass up on showing you guys because one of them is possibly the most unique setup I have ever seen, and the other does that. Yeah, I got some good stuff for y'all today. Let's get into it. Vault and summons are not two words you would commonly find placed together in the same sentence, especially not me telling you that he is one of the best summoner frames as of late when used with desiccation. Yeah, desiccation comes off of Inaros, and up until this point, I have not seen much use, if any at all, for this subsume. Alone, desiccation costs 25 energy to cast, where you will then scatter a wave of cursed sand in front of you for a base 15 meters within a 180-degree cone that will stagger enemies, deal a slight amount of true damage on hit with a lingering true damage dot, and steal 25% of their HP to heal yourself. So it's a light form of crowd control that heals you. Cool. But I forgot to mention that blinded enemies are also opened up to melee finishers, which is important because it's the augment of Desiccation's Curse that we actually want here. Desiccation's Curse causes kills on blinded enemies with finishers to summon a Swarm Kavat that spreads a debuff called Scarab Swarm, the maximum amount of Swarm Kavats also being increased from 3 to 5. Swarm Kavats are an innate part of Inaros' kit, normally accessible through his fourth ability of Scarab Swarm that will go around attacking enemies and spreading that effect, which consists of 10% of your max HP being dealt as corrosive damage with a guaranteed corrosive status proc per half second. The casts themselves last for 20 seconds individually and would lead you to believe that you must be spamming finisher kills to maintain them, but not necessarily, as when enemies under Scarab Swarm die, they too will spawn a Kavat, so after a single finisher it is infinitely self-sustaining, which is far more manageable. So how does Vault play into this? Well, two of his augments are of utmost importance here: Shock Trooper and Shocking Speed. Firstly, Shock Trooper adds at base 100% more electric damage to you and all ally attacks, which does extend to any sort of summon or companion. Where this build has improved recently though, is that elemental damage augments used to add their damage onto weapons like mods, where they would combine with available elements if possible. In the Swarm Kavat case, they already dealt corrosive damage, so this electric would just add into that, making it more powerful but ridding them of the ability to trigger the lately very strong electric status. Post 1999 though, these elemental augment mods do not combine with available elements on weapons, which is definitely the better option here, as now alongside the innate corrosive damage and armor stripping, Kavats have a secondary AoE component present on them at very high percentages, mind you. Shocking Speed on the other hand is an augment I didn't even know existed before this, but its use here is honestly quite ingenious. This augment causes those under the effects of speed to inflict 300 electricity damage and status to enemies within close proximity of them while they are moving. This sounds alright at first glance, but now with our Kavats and companion moving at the speed of sound, this electric AoE will be applying Scarab Swarm as well, which, did I mention, completely crowd controls enemies, as in they just stop doing anything. Typically, Kavats can only apply Swarm by direct melee hits, and their AI is just a little bit stupid, but it's the AoE from Shocking Speed that allows them to spread it by just being near them, and when using other stuff like Summoner's Wrath, the damage gets a little crazy. Summoner's Wrath is a new aura mod with 1999 that gives summons and companions 75% more multiplicative damage, which is just incredibly strong. Besides that, there is also Arcane Kamisado that grants you 60% more ability strength as your companions deal damage, but more importantly, gives them 20% more movement speed at rank 5, and that is the key damage increase here, which is why speed is so nice besides the augment. The quicker they move, the more damage is dealt, as entering and leaving the radius will trigger Shocking Speed on both instances. Vault himself actually has a total of 4 augments, the 3 previously mentioned, and then Capacitance for survivability. Capacitance just causes his fourth to grant you and allies shields and overshields when his fourth ticks for damage at a 3% conversion rate. This just entirely solves survivability on him, and for our other 4 mod slots, Blind Rage combines with Kamisado to get a lot more strength for his 1 and 2. Prime Continuity gives some duration comfort for speed in particular, as it doesn't last too long innately, and 175 range scales the 3 meter radius on Shocking Speed to 5.25 meters. Energize in your arcane slot is honestly more than enough to maintain the 45% efficiency. You don't cast very often, and even then his abilities are not crazy expensive besides the 4th. Only one finisher is needed to start this cascade, but having a good melee in general is going to help. So for this, I choose the Magistar because it is both a great finisher weapon and an insane slam weapon. Here are the evolutions that I use. This is a pretty cookie cutter slam build with just one mod changed out for some more finisher damage, the electric 2 trigger influence coming from Shock Trooper. Otherwise, this frame loadout is quite open. Companion wise, you can run pretty much anything you want, but the best option is definitely a Sunika Kubro. I don't currently have that companion though, so I'm just going to throw up the mods you should use on it. The claw build looking like this. Eximus will be the only slight issue you face with this build, and a massively juiced up Sunika will just kind of destroy them. This vault setup is honestly one of the most fun builds I have put together in a while. Credit absolutely goes to Wearplant on Reddit for being the originator of this particular setup, and Tactical Potato for being the one to popularize it to my knowledge. The Nova build on the other hand, I sourced that one a bit more locally, coming from a user kyaii in my Discord. Thank you to him for literally spending all of his time in there yapping about this Warframe. He actually put together a pretty crazy setup. Before getting to it though, if you could like this video and subscribe, I would really appreciate it as it helps out the channel a ton. Thank you. Nova's 4th ability, Molecular Prime, is one of the stronger ones in the game. Costing 100 energy to cast, doing so will have Nova slam her hand into the ground to unleash a radial wave of antimatter particles. There are 2 versions of this wave, either slow or speed, but before covering that, the wave for both versions propagates at a rate of 5 meters per second for 6 seconds before dissipating, all enemies encompassed by it being coated in said antimatter particles that debuff them with 100% damage vulnerability, otherwise known as they just take double damage. This makes Molecular Prime one of the unique abilities where duration actually scales the radius it covers better than the range stat itself. This expansion can be calculated as wave radius being equal to 5 plus 5 times wave duration times ability duration. With actual stats and values applied in the case you're using something like Prime Continuity, it will look as shown and result in 51.5 meters being covered. This wave does go through walls too, which makes its high range coverage quite good. Back to the 2 versions though, tapping the ability key will cause this wave to slow enemies down by a base 50%, and holding will increase their action speed by the same amount, capping off at 75% for 150 strength. There is also a synergy present here between this ability and her passive, which states that enemies killed by Nova while slowed have a 15% chance to drop a health orb, and those split up a 15% chance to drop an energy orb. Way more important than any of that stuff though, is that when an enemy afflicted by Molecular Prime is killed, it will detonate to deal 800 blast damage with a 20% status chance within a 10 meter radius. This explosion has a 60% linear fall off, but uniquely will inherit the properties of whatever weapon is used to trigger the explosion to itself. This is most commonly seen with things like the Gen 1 Incarnants and the explosion inheriting the plus 2000% multiplicative damage boost from them to make it significantly stronger. But this effect extends to far more things in far more interesting ways, namely dagger melees. Daggers are a great melee class alone for many reasons, one of the best though being Amalgam Argonac Metal Augur. This mod causes dagger damage to reduce enemy armor by 6, which on first read probably sounds awful, because most enemies past like level 50 have 2700 of it, and needing to hit them 450 times is, yeah. But it actually works like another melee armor strip mod, Shattering Impact. These 2 mods target not the actual level of armor a high level enemy has, but rather the value they have at base or their lowest level, which in the gunner's case is 500. And because this effect applies universally to all dagger damage, it will carry over to status damage like heat, toxin, blast, etc, etc. Now, as I'm sure you could probably guess, Molecular Prime will inherit that effect with the explosion and potential blast procs now armor stripping, but what you probably didn't know is that Molecular Prime can inherit melee influence and cause those aforementioned blast procs to be spread within an 18 meter radius on death. This pretty much all just compounds into you having the ability to kill one enemy, they explode and trigger influence with blast, all of that stuff armor strips, and then blast will trigger again for even more damage. Add an Exodia Force by using a Zaw Dagger, and now you have a 200% weapon radial damage blast occurring on every other status proc without a cooldown that scales its own damage pretty damn well. In terms of how you want to build this one, it's honestly a little weird because we're really just trying to start the chain of explosions with the melee, so we build quite high range, Condition Overload to scale base damage, 2 of the Galvanize mods to get more critical chance and damage alongside status chance and status damage, which is double dipped by our faction mod. Berserker Fury gives more attack speed and Voltaic Strike to trigger influence obviously. On Nova, 2 energy shards are pretty comfy and 1 casting speed shard is going to make all the difference, our Helmet of Zada's Whisper being put over her 3. Zada's is the proverbial cherry on top of this build for a couple reasons. By itself, this ability is complicated, but specifically concerning this Nova build, seeing as Zada's is an extension of our weapon's damage, the explosion from Molecular Prime will kyaiiyt, and the resulting blast explosion spread by that because of melee influence will re-trigger Zada's for again another hit. The two main things to scale here are the range of the explosion and the strength for its base damage, and Zada's of course, which is why we have invested into both pretty heavily with all three major range mods and the use of Blind Rage, Umbral Intensify, Growing Power, and Malt Augmented for 268 strength that gives Zada's a 69.68% bonus. Adaptation's 90% damage resist will combine with Null Star's 90% DR to make her quite survivable, the Null Stars themselves being easily refilled by the augment of Molecular Fission, which has kills on primed enemies restored 2 per. Duration at 155 gives great coverage from Molecular Prime, the low efficiency being well managed by Energize and her passive. Using the speed version of her fourth has other benefits besides energy management too due to our companion of Nautilus synergizing quite well with it. Grouping is one of the strongest damage buffs we can get here, and Cordon from Nautilus performs that quite well. The following build allowing you to spam it endlessly as enemies sped up by her fourth have this pull effect dramatically increased. This build also works quite well against Eximus with this weapon setup on Verglass. Otherwise, just make sure you've got the Argonac on with Amalgam Argonac and you are all set. That pretty much wraps things up for this Nova and Vault double feature. I didn't really feel like either of these two builds were long or deep enough to warrant an entire video being dedicated to them, but putting them together worked out quite well, especially because I just made individual videos on both of these frames. If you enjoyed this one, liking this video and subscribing is a great way to help out. A massive thank you also goes to my YouTube and Patreon supporters, who without their help, I could not do what I do. I'll see you all very soon for a pretty hype Excalibur Perfected episode. It's gonna be crazy, y'all. Peace.